What's up, Epic 7? Well, Smilegate just released the patch notes for next month, and holy smokes, they changed a lot of units. So much so that I felt compelled to put out an updated Selector Tier list, because this changed a lot of things, up to and including who I think you should use your 5-star selectors, decked out selectors, and artifact selectors on. So I'm just going to breeze through this real quick and touch on the important facts, because I don't want to bore you with another 2-hour-long tier list, right? So first, let's talk about the units. So this is my tier list for who you should use selectors on. Let's just jump right in. First, there's Iseria. Iseria is a very important unit to have on your team. She can reset Tamarin, she can reset Dark Corvus, she defense breaks, she strips, she has defense break on her S1 and S2. You can load her up with damage, you can give her an artifact like Song of Stars. She brings so much to your team, and she does something no other unit does, and I think that's very important. Now, she does not require a great deal of Molagora. In fact, you can get away with relatively little Molagora on her, so this is you want to use a normal selector on, not a fully decked out selector. A unit you would want to use a fully decked out selector on is a unit like Fire Ravi. Ravi is a powerhouse unit that will help you clear a lot of early game content that's difficult. She self-sustains with her healing, she can do AoE hits as well as single target hits, you can build her tanky and she still does great damage, you can give her an artifact that makes her even tankier by letting her self-heal. Very, very nice unit to have, but all of her skills are important for her kit, so you're going to want to have her on plus 15 Molagora, so this is a great unit to use a decked out selector on if you still have one going. Another unit that is great for a decked out selector is Celine. Like Ravi, she's really good at clearing early game content. A lot of the bosses and some of the harder fights on some of the higher stages of adventure are loaded with non-attack skills, and that will let Celine use her passive to drop even more damage into the fight. Celine, much like Ravi, is a powerhouse unit in later RTA, so you're going to find her very, very useful and valuable even in late game. Fantastic pickup, but like most DPS units, you're going to want her at plus 15, so if you've got a decked out selector, this is a good unit to use it on. Fire Politis. Now, something to be aware of with Politis is at the end of Chapter 3, once you beat Bellona, a selective summon will open for you in the summon section, and Politis is one of those units that you can grab from that selective summon. So you may decide to not pick Politis and get her from that selective summon, or you may decide to select her. Now, there's two popular builds for Politis. One is for use in PvP where you are dealing with people trying to cleave you. And those builds are built relatively tanky, relatively fast, with lots of effectiveness in ER, and they aren't putting a drop of Molagora into her damage, right? They're all about ruining your opponent's plans. Those kind of Politises, if you want to build one of those, great for a normal selector. But if you want to go the other side and go with a full damage Politis, where you get all of the benefits of her kit, but you make her nuclear. Sure, she's going to get controlled, she's not going to stick her debuffs on as many units, but she'll blow things up and hit like a truck. So if you're going with the damage build, you're going to want plus 15, and you may want to consider using a fully decked out selector. Whether or not you should get two of them, I recommend just pick one and stick with it until you've got all the rest of the units you want. It's better to have two different units than dupes of the same unit, but Politis is one of the most popular units for people to have two of on their account. The same as with Politis, Choux you can also get from that selective summon at the end of Chapter 3. So you can choose which one you want to get from that. Choux is another unit that is really good in early PvP. She falls off a little bit in late PvP, but she is still a very strong unit. She'll be one of your first hyper carries when you start getting into RTA. And in the end game and the late game, she is really, really strong for use in PvE fights like Nightmare Raid, where you're trying to beat Executioner Carcanus. She's probably the best unit for fighting Carcanus. Because she is a damage dealer unit, she does want plus 15, so you will probably want to consider running, you'll probably want to consider using a decked out selector on her. Now we've got Destina. Destina is one of the best Soul Weavers in the game. She is a safety net with arrays, she heals on all of her skills, she can help control the tempo of the fight with a CR push on her S2, AoE cleanses on her S3, Really good pickup, especially for early game players. Having a safety net that can bring your units back from the dead, your entire team back from the dead, and continue to heal after that, really, really good unit to have on the team. All of her skills are healing-based skills, so the more Mola you have in them, the better a Soul Weaver she's going to be. But she does heal decent enough with mid to low Mola range, so you may not want to use a decked out selector here. It's much more important for decked out selectors to go into damage dealers. I think you'll eventually want to level up her to probably about plus 13, 14 to get the maximum benefit out of her healing. She definitely is worthy of a decked out selector if you have the other units, but you don't necessarily need to dump something as important as a decked out selector into a Soul Weaver. I do think she does warrant a regular selector though at very least. Same with Roana. Roana is a plus 14 unit to get the maximum benefit. Her S3 is all her healing and raise skill, her S2 is all of her passive healing, and her S1 is, with the exception of the very last Mola, her S1 is all kinds of barrier boosting. So a unit you'll eventually want at plus 14 to min-max her capabilities, but you probably don't want to dump a selector into her because she doesn't need these things to heal, she needs these things to heal better. And as you progress and get to the point where she's just not keeping up with the healing, you can stick some Mola in her to bring her up where it needs to be. And last on the must-have lists, and I put them up here because it's a little bit early to say for sure, but the Great Mortellix. Here's the thing. First of all, if you decide to go with Mort, he is a plus 15 unit. You would want to use a decked out selector if you've got one, at very least use a regular selector. Based on the balance patch changes, this guy is going to be god tier. Story and lore accurate Mort. This guy's going to be insanely powerful and is going to be a thorn in our sides and a feather in our hat moving forward, depending on which side of the playing field he's on in the fight. I think Mort is a very, very good pickup, but it's an assumption. We've been wrong before. We've seen units like Kayron come out where everyone thought this unit was garbage. We've seen units come out like Albedo, and people complained for weeks saying this unit's unplayable, and then they became some of the best in the game. We've seen units like Harsetti come out where everybody was flailing their arms in the air and screaming, it's the end of the world, she's going to ruin anything, everything, end of service, you can't beat this. And it turns out, she just dies. She's not that good. I mean, she's great at stopping anti-cleave, but she's not the monstrosity everybody expected her to be, right? So we don't really know what Mort's going to look like. Also, Mort is 4 weeks away. If you pick him with your selector right now, you're going to sit him in the lobby and watch him do really nothing for you until the end of October. So be aware of that as well. You might want to not use a selector on Mort. You might instead use a selector on other units, and then if Mort is the God King we expect him to be, you can go and activate his story and pick him from the side story summons, right? So these are the must-have units. These are units I think everybody's going to want on their account. One of them they're probably going to want 2 of on their account. Now let's get down to solid use. These are units that from early game to late game you will probably find usage for these units. First is Ran. Ran is a very, very strong opener. Anything that can spam defense breaks and has a penetration skill on his S1 is going to be good for you, right? This unit will allow you to do damage as you go through adventure. He will increase your ability to beat Executioner Carcanus in Nightmare Raid, and when you get into RTA, he will be fantastic. He's also a unit where every single one of his skills increases his damage, and a lot of people just look at him as a speed opener, but he does terrific damage, and you're really leaving a lot on the table by not maxing his skills out. So I think Ran is worthy of a decked out selector if you still have one, and if not, a regular selector is fine. Then we've got Aria. A lot of people are going to tell you Aria is hard to build, and that's true, but it also isn't. Aria is very easy to build for PvE, right? If you want to build a Wyvern Aria, she is the easiest build for a one-shot Wyvern in the game. No other Wyvern one-shot takes lower gear than the Aria team. And she'll also be able to help you out a lot in Abyss. I've had Abyss floors where people say, how do I beat this Abyss floor? I'm like, you take Aria, you put her on the team, and you press auto, and you win. She's that good on some levels of Abyss. You're going to find she is fantastic in Guild Wars, but the more you take her into PvP, the more you're going to find that you're going to want her to be built better. And once you get into the competitive side, where you start caring about things like health and effect resistance, that's when she gets kind of stat hungry and gets really hard to build. So I understand why people say she's hard to build, but just understand, even for early game, she's fantastic for PvE, and you will grow into her usages at PvP. This is a unit who can get away without being plus 15, especially for Wyvern, but I think you're eventually going to want it, so you could use a maxed out, decked out Selector here, but at very least a regular Selector. I strongly recommend you get Aria on your account. Alencia is the strongest injury unit in the game by a large margin. If you are wanting to injure out units that are HP scalers that are causing you problems to make them easier to kill, Alencia is your girl. She synergizes really well with Death Dealer Ray, and I think her usefulness in RTA is a little bit lower than we expected, but she is fantastic in Guild Wars. So nice pickup for you. She is a damage dealer, so you'll eventually want her at plus 15. Same with Ida. Ida is a powerhouse ice DPS unit. I think plus 15 on her is very warranted, both for her damage and her effects, worthy of a Selector if you don't have anything in the top. If you have everything in the top row knocked out, definitely worthy. More Arena and Guild War used than RTA and Adventure, but she still does find uses in those locations. Zahhak is a great pickup. Another plus 15 unit worthy of your decked out Selector. Zahhak brings so much damage to the floor. He is really good at punching through evasion units, so if units like Savior Auden, Violet, Remnant Violet, BBK on evasion, Degen Arby's, if these are giving you trouble, Zahhak is your guy. If you don't engage in the PvP side of things, he is still one of the best units to take into Nightmare Raid for killing the mosquitoes, the Jewel Leaf Council. He is a Giga Chad for that. One of the easiest units to clear that stage, so I think Zahhak is a worthwhile pickup. Nahkwol is probably one of, if not the best RTA units. She doesn't have a lot of use outside of RTA, but she is so strong at helping you get into RTA that I think she is worth mentioning. She doesn't need plus 15. It's nice to have on her, but it certainly isn't required. I would just use a regular Selector on Nahkwol, and she's a great one to have in your bag so that when you're ready to set foot into RTA, you'll be ready to build this girl and jump in. Now we're starting to scrape a little bit of the bottom of the barrel of solid use, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about these three. Fumyr is a tech pick. You're going to have to plan your entire team around her, but if you plan your entire team around her, you can devastate people in Arena, in Guild Wars, and a little bit in RTA. Not much use in PvE, but a very strong pick and worthy of a Selector if you've got all of the units we've mentioned already. Green Bellona is a unit that early on, she is a new player's best friend. Her damage is insane. Her ability to cleave through Abyss is crazy. If you are struggling on a floor, Bellona can probably fix it for you. If you're struggling with PvE content, Bellona is great in Banshee. She's great in A13. She's great in Hell Rage. She's great in... she's great at clearing Abyss. I think she is a worthwhile pickup. Now, once you have taken care of all of your PvE needs, you probably aren't going to reach for her very much anymore, right? Except for the occasional things like occasional niche PvE limited time events like Rift, where she is insane, or Advent, where she always seems to come out again when we're fighting the Ice Advent. So when you need her, it's nice to have her, but once you hit that late game point, you're going to reach for her less and less because she doesn't do really anything on the RTA side of things and does very, very little in the Guild War Arena side of things. And that's a similar story for Luluca. Luluca is one of the queens of PvE. She has so much in her kit that will advance you through Abyss. She's good in early Wyvern. She is great in Hall of Trials. There's always some event that comes out that it seems like Luluca is just necessary for. So I think she's a worthwhile pickup, although once you get to late game, you're going to reach for her less and less because everything Luluca does, somebody else does a little bit better. But they may only do one of the things Luluca does, or two of the things Luluca does. Nobody does all of the things Luluca does. So she's a great unit to have to cover so many different roles until you get all the individual options that are better than her in those roles to pick when you need them. So she is a great jack-of-all-trades unit to have, and I think a worthwhile pickup, especially with how good she is in the recent Holo Trials. And now's the niche use section, right? Elena is going to absolutely hard stomp random Peira cleaves. She's good in RTA, and that's about it. Lilias is more of a PvE knight than a PvP knight. She dual attacks. She can cleanse your entire team. Her damage scales off the highest attack unit on the team, letting her bring a lot of damage. She's great in Nightmare Raid. Abigail has some uses in RTA, but she is a new player's golden girl. She will let you climb in RTA when you're just getting started. She will save your life in a lot of PvE contents. I'm actually giga surprised how good Abigail is for new players, and hats off to Deity for pointing that out to me. Vildred is the only AoE speed imprint that gives 12 speed, which is more speed than any other unit in the game gives AoE. There are a couple of 14 speed boosters, but it's only to 2 slots. Of course, you do have to have multiple imprints of Vildred. I'm not recommending you select something as important as a selector for imprints, but getting started on your Vildred is good. He's also great at clearing content and for helping boost your speed when you are playing later RTA. Peira is one of the strongest openers in the game for cleave. Aramintha is a very, very strong burn unit who will probably have amazing synergy with the soon-to-be buffed Silverblade Aramintha. Violet is an evasion unit who counters every time somebody misses on him, so think about that synergy right there and why Violet sometimes can solo entire fights. As long as the enemy doesn't have a way to deal with evasion units, Violet is a really good way to get into RTA and start pushing levels. Same with Senya. Senya is another good unit as long as you avoid things that can always crit, like Lone Crescent, Bellona, and Charlotte. Senya can help you climb an early arena as well as early guild wars. Kayron, if you are tired of getting cleaved, Kayron's your man. A well-built Kayron can stop cleave in its tracks. Beehoo is a fantastic opener both for guild wars, arena, and RTA. You won't find much uses for him in PvE, but he is a super, super strong unit. Charlotte is one of the few units that a few RGB units that always crits. Like always. If you got troubles killing Landy and you want to be able to make sure you crit when you hit her, Charlotte's great for that. She's also a knight, so she can wear bruisery artifacts that improve her survivability or the survivability of the rest of your team. Really strong unit. Haste and Tenebria are very similar to Luluca and Bellona. These are units that when you get late game, you probably won't reach for them that much except for very specific niche situations, but because Bellona and Luluca are so strong into primary content like Abyss, like Holo Trials, I'm rating them a little bit higher than the much more occasional usages of Tenebria and Haste. There are certain floors where Tenebria is busted good, and there are certain situations where Haste is amazing, but they're fewer and farther between. Not enough to land them in the solid use category, but enough to mention them. Early players are going to find a lot of use for these units. Haste is one of the few non-Soul Weavers who can keep your team healthy. He has a healing skill on his S2. He's got defense breaks. He can put debuffs on units that let your own team self-heal. Tenebria is loaded with sleeps and defense breaks herself. Really good in expeditions and in Abyss. I think both of them are worth picking up if you have all of these top 2 rows and are struggling with some PvE content. You may want to pick them up. And the last one is Yulha. I've moved her up on this list, and the reason is because her buff looks like it might make her actually pretty good in Guild Wars and RTA again. We'll have to see. I hope I don't regret bringing her up, but looking at her kit, I think now she's got the chops to take care of problems that she just couldn't quite land before, so another solid pickup. Now, there's a lot of units that I didn't mention, right? There's a lot of units not on this tier list. Those are units that I think that though they may be really good or situationally amazing, I don't think they're quite worth using a selector on. I don't think there's enough selectors in the game that it's worth it. If you have all of these units already, then start looking at the other units and pick the one that you like the most and get it and run with it. Ask your friends for some help, but I don't think any of them rank high enough to be included on this list as things that you should use a selector on. Now, real quick, let's slide over and talk about the artifacts. I tried to break this down the same way. I didn't put a lot of the artifacts in here because there's no reason for me to say, here's my selector list, don't pull these. it's not on the list, I don't think it's worth getting. So let's go over them real quick. Elbris Ritual Sword is one of the most important, if not the most important, knight artifact in the game. This is so important that you'll probably eventually want 3, 4, maybe even 5 of these on your kit, on your team at some point. So definitely want to pick up at least 1, maybe 2 or 3 Elbris. If you've got a selector, worthwhile pickup. Bloodstone, you want at least 1, right? It doesn't have to be imprinted or anything. You want at least 1 Bloodstone on your team. It'll make so much PvE content more accessible. Just about every guide out there for hard content is going to involve Bloodstone. It's great to be able to run expeditions. Get one of these. It is a quasi-limited artifact in the sense that it's not tied to anybody's banner. Because it's not tied to anybody's banner, it will never show up in the shop in conjunction with a unit being run. You're going to have to wait for it to just naturally rotate into the shop or to randomly pull one. So if you've got a selector, Bloodstone's a good one to pick up. Wind Rider is likewise not tied to anybody's banner, so it will never show up in the shop as a result of being on banner. It'll only show up in the lower shop as a random occurrence or from random drops. There's no store you can activate to get this, so this is a great artifact, right? Thieves are in general kind of squishy, so you want to be able to have a way to protect your thieves. Thieves usually do a lot of damage, and that's where this artifact shines. Units like Janua, units like Sid, units like Lilias, who's coming out in a few days. You want to be able to kill something with that unit, and then Wind Rider will proc and hide them and give them stealth. And that makes them harder to kill. That's why it's so great on Thieves, is it gives you that layer of protection of stealth along with boosting damage significantly. Sigurd's Scythe and Golden Rose are kind of in the same class of artifacts, right? They're both warrior artifacts, and they both are self-sustaining artifacts for bruisers. The big difference is Sigurd's Scythe, you have to get below 50% health, and then it heals you a lot better than Rose heals you. And it gives you a giant boost to attack, allowing typically more damage than what Golden Rose allows. But until you're below 50% health, it doesn't do anything. But you also noticed I said attack. Golden Rose allows you to do damage no matter what the health is, right? No matter how low your health is, Golden Rose lets you do damage. And if you fall below 50%, it increases your healing, or it heals your unit. So both heal below 50%. Sigurd's is a stronger heal, but Golden Rose does damage the entire range of your HP bar, whereas Sigurd's only does bonus damage when you're below 50% health. So this is really good on attack scaling units. Attack scaling units typically have lower HP than defense and HP scaling units, right? So you're likely to go below 50% faster, and then the strong healing gets you all the way back up again, and you do giga damage. Golden Rose increases damage, not attack, and because it increases damage, it's much better on HP and defense scalers. HP and defense scalers don't care about the attack boosts. So the rule of thumb is Sigurd's for attack scalers, Golden Rose for HP and defense scalers. The healing's not as strong, but if you're an HP scaler, you're tankier, and you can take having your HP drop a little bit, and you like having the damage all the time because it takes longer to get you below the 50% threshold. So it really makes sense. When people say, which one do I use on which units? Attack scalers like Lone Crescent Bellona, attack scalers like Fire Ravi find lots of uses for Sigurds, whereas HP scalers like Lionheart Sirmia or Apoc Ravi will find much more use out of Golden Rose. And lastly is Secret Art Storm Sword. This artifact is crazy good on Savior Auden, on Celine, on Spirit Eye Celine. I've seen it used on BBK and RB with authority. This unit is used on so many meta thieves that I would be remiss if I didn't put it in the must-have column. Every single artifact in the must-have column, you'll probably want multiples of eventually. Just get one of each for now, but eventually you're going to want multiples of these. You're going to pull a unit, and somebody will say, what artifact do I put on? You say Elbris, and you'll say, but I've got Elbris on that unit. Oh yeah, you want on that unit too. And also this other unit, you'll want Elbris on that too. What's best on Celine? Oh, you gotta have Storm Sword on her. She's not a real unit if you don't have Storm Sword. Oh, well, what do I put on Spirit Eye Celine? Oh, Storm Sword there too. So these are all artifacts that you will want to get multiples of eventually as you progress through the game. Now, these solid use artifacts are all really, really good artifacts. In most cases, you aren't going to need more than one. Holy Sacrifice is one that you could theoretically use more than one, but it's more of a luxury at that point. Holy Sacrifice has a 75% chance to bring your knight back to life after it dies. And that can go all the way up to 100% as you imprint it. So Holy Sac is one of those artifacts that's really good to get, but does have some RNG to it. Touch of Rekos, AoE heals your team. You're never going to need more than one Touch of Rekos, but having it is great. Touch of Rekos is a way to passively heal your team so that if your healer is relatively slow or out of turn order, this little bit of healing can keep you alive long enough for your healer to catch up and fix it. I've found so many uses for Touch of Rekos. I think it's a great pickup. Rod of Amaryllis is in the same category as Windrider and Bloodstone in that it is a quasi-limited artifact, right? You can get it at any point in time from random pulls. It can show up in the powder shop, but it will never have its own banner. It's not tied to any specific unit, so it will never be on banner, if you get what I'm saying. So Rod of Amaryllis allows your Soul Weavers to do extra targeted healing when they use a non-attack skill. So this is really nice to give extra targeted healing to the most hurt unit and heal that unit up even when you're using a non-attack skill that is not a healing skill. If it is a healing skill, it actually stacks the healing and you do double healing to that one unit. Alexa's Basket is arguably the best artifact for Arbiter Vildred. It's also really good on Tempest Surin. It's really good on pretty much any thief that you want to drop big damage. I've seen this thing on everything from Janua to BBK lately. Because it's used on so many meta units and because having a free self-attack buff before you take a turn that can sometimes be greater attack buff, it's a crazy powerful artifact, and I think you should pick up at least one of these. Song of Stars, again, another artifact you only really need one of, and having it will greatly increase your ability to overcome a lot of PvE situations. It'll make your one-shot teams that much easier. It'll make some PvE content that much easier. It's a great artifact to run on Iseria. Just make sure you're careful that the enemy boss doesn't have one of those weird passives that says too many debuffs and it does an awful thing. But other than that, Song of Stars lets you put target on an enemy with a single target attack, and that's 15% more damage and 15% more chance to hit through evasion and misses. So it's a very, very good artifact to have. Shimadra Staff. You want to talk about the most underrated artifact? Shimadra Staff. This increases the healing power of your entire team. Not just your healers, not just healing spells, everything. Everything that increases health gets better. Lifesteal set now heals more. Units that have passive healing built into their kit like Ravi, that heals more. Anything that does any artifact that gives healing like Golden Rose or Sigurd Scythe, now that heals better. So on top of that, this gives 20% effect resistance to every single member on your team. It is such a stupendous artifact, and I just don't think it's utilized nearly as much as it should be, especially in difficult PvE content where you just are having trouble staying ahead of the damage. This on your Soul Weaver can fix that. Celestine is another Soul Weaver artifact. It is another semi-limited artifact. It used to be tied to DN, but it's no longer tied to DN anymore. So you can get it at any point in time from random summons. It can show up in the powder shop randomly, but there's no unit in the game that will ever run that will have this artifact with it. So Celestine right now is best in slot on Blood Moon Haste. Any unit that does attacks, they will heal with Celestine. So this is great for Soul Weavers that don't have the ability to heal on their S1. It gives them that healing. It can be used on Roana. It can be used on, like I said, on Blood Moon Haste. It could be used on Inos 2.0. It can be used on pretty much any Soul Weaver that's run on counter, because the counters will trigger this and heal with the S1 attack. So it's a really nice artifact to just give that little bit of extra healing to your Soul Weavers. Merciless Glutton is 16% extra damage, and it's unconditional. Unlike a lot of artifacts that boost damage that say, like Exorcist Tonfa, that only boost the damage for the first 50% of the health bar, this boosts the damage across the entire run of the health bar. And when you kill something, it CR pushes your entire team, which is fan-freaking-tastic. Doctor's Bag is a great way to add secondary healing and secondary cleanse to Soul Weavers who lack that a little bit. It's really nice on Elena. It's really nice on Ray. It's really nice on Moon Bunny Dominial. When you use a non-attack skill every 2 or 3 rounds, it will cleanse a debuff and do extra healing, and it's a solid chunk of healing. So this is a nice artifact to have if you're running Soul Weavers that are struggling to keep up with debuffs or struggling to keep up with healing. This can take the edge off. And last in my solid use is Edica's Scepter. Edica's Scepter allows you for a chance to reduce your skill cooldowns at the start of a turn. So if you're running Angel of Light Angelica, for example, and Nahkwol comes along and resets her skills, she can take a turn, this will proc and unreset her skills, and then she can use her S3. It's really a fantastic artifact, and one that I think you should have at least one of on your team. It's good on Luna, New Moon Luna, it's good on Angel Light Angelica. You'll find uses for it on your PvE mages like Tenebria, Sageball, or Fireball and Cezanne, as well as Luluca. And that's it for my solid use to must-haves. Now, a quick brush over the niche artifacts. First, we got Little Queen's Huge Crown. Very similar to Merciless Glutton in how it works. It does give you a similar damage boost, but it gives you additional damage conditional on barriers being present. There's no CR push like you get with Glutton on a kill, but if you're fighting enemies that proc barriers, Little Queen's Huge Crown is massive. Now, mind you, it's got to be a legitimate barrier. The permanent barriers, like the one that Wyvern puts up, don't count towards the damage boost of this artifact. So you're not suddenly going to get massive damage against the Wyvern when its barrier phase comes up. Eligiac Candle gives defense breaks to any ranger, so if you want to add defense breaks to your already heavily utilized ranger's kit, Eligiac Candle is great. Unseen Observer allows you to generate souls whenever a ranger uses a non-attack skill. Fantastic on Flan or Astromancer Elena. Bastion of Perlucia allows you to give immunity and a barrier to the back row unit, and this will allow you to put this on a knight and give immunity to 2 units that don't run immunity set, which can be very useful in a lot of setup comps. Abyssal Crown if you just want to be that guy and stun people. Abyssal Crown is one of the more toxic artifacts you have to fight against, and one of the more frustrating ones to use when it never seems to proc on your side. Stella Harpa is kind of only used on Roana right now. It does allow you to have a chance to cleanse a debuff every time you're hit, and that can be really nice on Roana, who you want to have hit because you want to have her on teams where counterattacks and dual attacks are happening to proc her healing and CR pushes. So it's really nice on her since you are actively using her into fights where you want constant counterattacks coming your way. This will help with the cleansing. Sword of Summer Twilight is a really good damage artifact. Sword of Summer Twilight will add penetration to even your AoE skills. It's kind of like an upgraded Elia's Knife where it works even when the enemy is at full health. Really nice artifact for Ran, for Vildred, for any unit where you're trying to get extra damage. Spear of a New Dawn is an incredibly niche artifact. It's only used on Senya, green Senya, but if you want to run Senya, you need this artifact. Without it, she barely works. It's also decent on Summer Break Charlotte if you're looking for a second use for a second one. Though I do not recommend pulling multiples of this artifact, guys. Snow Crystal is really good on Ice Choux. It's got a neat kit to help you evade crit and to self-CR push. Time Matter if you want to take your Banshee hunts to the next level. Vivian on Time Matter is so good because it resets her S2 when you kill, and that keeps her from using her S1 inside of the next phase, which avoids dual attacks, which can brick your run. So if you want to make your Banshee way more consistent, Time Matter is a great pickup for Vivian. Black Hand of the Goddess for mages and Manica of Control for thieves are basically the same artifact. They give a huge amount of crit chance boost. One gives crit damage, the other gives the chance to hit through evasion. They're both stat sticks. They're really nice to finish off your thieves when you can't quite get the stats that you need, but eventually you'll probably move away and use these artifacts seldom, if at all. Goblet of Oath is really nice on Peira and Ran for resetting S3s. Shepherd of the Hollow is really nice on any thieves that you want on evasion, so Auden, Violet, Remnant Violet, some BBKs. This is a really nice artifact to add evasion and damage to the kit. Durandal is a really nice artifact for warriors that you want to CR push faster. You can put this on Dark Corvus. You can put this on Fire Ken for use in Wyvern. Has a few niche uses. And the last honorable mention is Rihanna and Luciella. There's been a lot of talk about Rihanna and Luciella and how it works. I was under the impression that it could not proc during turns that were created by an extra turn proc, is the way they were wording it. So for example, if you S2 ran and then you get and then he does his next turn and you S3 and RNL procs, you would still get the extra turn. So now you can S1 again, and if it procs there, it won't work because that is a stage that was procced by RNL and RNL can't proc another one. I'm told by somebody that I trust to really know how the mechanics of this game work, that is in fact not the case. It just prevents stacking, where if it procs on his S2 and then you do his S3 and it procs again, you've not stashed away 2 procs. You only have 1 proc. And then RNL happens when he does his S1, and if RNL procs on his S1, you will get another one, because it's not stacking the extra turns. It's not banking them away so that units that have 2 skills can get 2 turns stored up to be used back to back. It's only letting it happen one at a time. You can only have 1 in your reserve of extra box. And if that's the case, then theoretically you could S2 RNL, S3 RNL, and S1, and that's it, because you could only you banked 2, but you could only keep 1 in the bank. So you got your S1, but if you RNL there, you could S1 again, because you spent your bank, you're back down to 0, you S1, you RNL, you bank again. So you theoretically you could S2, S3, S1, S1 if you procced RNL on the S1. I've reached out to Smilegate for confirmation on how this works. The guy I talked to said he wasn't sure either, and he was going to check. So I will put I'll put a message out to the community letting them know exactly how RNL works once I hear back from Smilegate, but it is the weekend, so I don't expect to hear anything back until early next week. Regardless, this only kind of has a niche use on Ran right now, and 1 or 2 other thieves like Genua who might try to exploit it. I'm not ready to throw it in the dumpster yet until I understand fully the implications of this recall and whether it is a dead artifact or if it's still viable. Now, one thing you'll notice from my previous tier list is Spirit's Breath is gone. The nerf to Oxalots has removed Spirit's Breath from the game. It only has 1 legitimate use anymore, and that's for use on Angel of Light Angelica. And I really think if you're running AOL, you're doing yourself a disservice if you aren't running Edicas. But if you don't have an Edicas, I guess, and you aren't running Book on AOL, then I guess you're going to want, I guess you can use Spirit's Breath as a third option. So anyway, these are my tier lists for the Selector post-update. Sorry I had to run this again. Hopefully this helps some of you guys out. If you have any questions, ask them in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care, Epic 7.